Hello, I'm Christian Olson. I'm the new gifted and talented elementary teacher for Park County School District 6. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how to differentiate for math in your elementary classroom using the Common Core. Now, as you all know, the Wyoming State Education Department recently adopted the Common Core as the Wyoming state standards. Now, the Common Core is more rigorous, but it's still designed with the typical student in mind, not the gifted student. So differentiation will still be necessary. But what does a gifted student look like in the math classroom? Well, they might be your students who are the most excited to be analyzing different numerical relationships. They might be the ones who have a really good memory for remembering the main features of both problems and solutions. They're also going to be the ones who will most appreciate the simplicity and economy of a good solution. They might also be the ones who are able to do everything up here, including reversing the steps. And they're likely to be the students who are most interested in exploring and organizing the relationships between different mathematical concepts and how they fit together. Your gifted student is typically going to need to hear something only once or twice before they understand a math or science concept. This is as compared to your average student who's going to need to hear things more like 6 to 8 times. That's a pretty big difference. So you can see why differentiation is still vital to have in the elementary classroom if we are going to be kindling these students' passion for math. Now, you're going to need both acceleration and enrichment in most gifted students' math education. I don't necessarily mean that we need to be grade skipping all of our gifted students or even sending them down the hall just for math, although both cases might be a good route for some of our students. Instead, what we need to look at is what the students know. Acceleration can be very useful and very effective, research shows, but it can't be rushed. Instead, it needs to be based off of evidence of what the student knows. To do that, I really recommend pre-testing, at least at the beginning of the year, if not at the beginning of every unit. You can differentiate and pre-test just for your gifted kids or the students you think might know the information already, but it can also be useful to pre-test for the entire class. It can be a little scary the first time, but once students understand that you're really looking for what they know and don't know so that you can ensure you're starting them where they need to be instead of forcing them to sit through the boring stuff that they already get, they are going to be all for it. Now, if acceleration is not a good fit for the student or circumstances just don't allow it, you really need to be looking at enrichment. Heck, even if you are accelerating, you should still be looking at enrichment as well. So, where you're looking at accelerating a student by looking at the scope and sequence of the Common Core and looking vertically at what the next grade level is doing. In order to enrich, you're looking at the scope and sequence, but you're looking horizontally from strand to strand, mathematical concept to mathematical concept. So for example, you might be teaching a class about measurement, but your gifted children could also benefit by doing an enrichment project that involves measurement and geometry. Two math concepts being addressed at the same time. Now that we've looked at why we need to differentiate, for who, and what are the two basic types of differentiation, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this and look at how do we do this. It sounds like a lot of work, and you've got a full classroom, but it's simpler than what it sounds. Basically, you're going to be looking at what you want your typical student to do and seeing how that can be tweaked for your gifted students. For example, if I have a first grade classroom and we're learning about bar graphs, maybe I ask the class a question and they give the answers, and then the students will individually make a bar graph to illustrate those answers. Very grade appropriate activity for them to be doing. Your gifted students, though, might be experts at doing that already. So how do you make it more challenging? By going more in depth. Require them to come up with a different question and to gather the information themselves. Then, depending on your student's level of ability, they could either be making a bar graph of their information, or they could make a graph of an entirely different type to illustrate that information. Either way, you have something that will be addressing the student's needs at their level. This is just a very simple one. They're still addressing those same basic concepts, but they're just doing it maybe at a higher level, going vertically up. What about if you want to enrich rather than accelerate? Let's take this example then. Third grade, maybe the students are measuring a plant and charting its growth day to day. That's what your whole class is doing. You're already combining measurement and data analysis for the whole class. So you have two strands. You could add a third strand and have your gifted students figure out fractions. What day has the most growth, or what fraction of the growth happens on Monday, happens on Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. Another option would be to still use those same two math strands of measurement and of data analysis, and instead bring in something cross-curricular from another content area altogether. An easy one to do would be, in this case, science. Your class is measuring one plant. Why not give your gifted students their own plant? They can come up with a hypothesis and use the class plant as their control and do something different with their own plant. Say, maybe they think more water will help the plant grow faster, or better fertilizer, or heck, listening to different types of music can make the plant grow faster or slower. They can then be graphing not only what the whole class is graphing, but graphing their own plant's growth, and then they need to compare and contrast the two graphs to find out whether their hypothesis is correct or not. In this case, they're still doing the same basic project as your class, but they're doing it at a higher level, requiring them to evaluate something in addition to just being able to summarize its information. So you have what you want the students to be doing, but how do you know that they're actually learning something instead of just going through the motions? Once again, it can be very simple. Look at how you're evaluating your basic, typical student and tweak as needed for your gifted ones. Let's go back to my first grade example of those students making a bar graph. On the whole, I want students to be able to label the graph, make the graph correctly, and summarize what its information is telling me. For those gifted students, I still want them to be able to label the graph, make the graph correctly, and summarize what the information is telling me. The only difference is this might be a little more complicated because the information they're getting is more complicated. I might also want them to be able to have a quantifiable question because they are coming up with their own questions. And lastly, they need to be able to gather the information successfully. Pretty easy to add those extra 2 steps. Now, as you go up and the more complicated the students' projects are, the less easy that's going to be. But here is another idea. Instead of you doing all of the extra work, why don't you bring the students in as part of the evaluation process? You can go ahead and use student rubrics with your gifted students. It may be a little more work up front because you have to teach them how to make the rubric and how to evaluate themselves. But once they have this down, they can use the same skill throughout the entire year, and not just in math, but in any content area. This will be especially helpful because students will be able to evaluate themselves, which is a higher thinking skill. And for those students who struggle with perfectionism, this is a great way for them to learn how to be able to look at their work more objectively and realize there's something between perfection, the epitome of everything being wonderful, and abject failure, which sadly is something some of our gifted students really struggle with. A rubric allows them to look at that sliding scale of ability. So, you're ready to get started, which is exciting. If this feels overwhelming, set a small goal. Maybe differentiate for 1 project a month. And don't forget, you have help. You can email me at christianolson@park6.org. That's KRISTIANOLSON. And I'll be more than happy to meet with you, whether it's to plan out a project or even co-teach with you, or if you just need to ask a few more clarifying questions or want more resources. I do have a book published this year by the National Association for Gifted Students called Differentiating Math with the Common Core. And you can also get a template to help you decide what you want your typical students and gifted students to be doing. All you have to do to get it is click the link down below. Until then, good luck and keep on teaching. Bye.